Sasha Vezenkov wants out of Sacramento, according to a report from Eurohoops. And while nobody here in the United States has confirmed that report, it's understandable. It's believable. In fact, it feels like it's been brewing for a while. We'll discuss the Kings' options with Sasha and what his future could possibly look like here in Sacramento right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all off season long. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer for ABC 10 News here in the California capital. And when I read this report this morning from Eurohoops, and I'll read the report for you right now. It says, Sasha Vezenkov has informed the Sacramento Kings that he doesn't intend to return for the second year of his contract. For now, it's open whether he will continue his career in the NBA or he will decide to return to Europe. That, again, is a report earlier today coming from Eurohoops, which is a basketball publication, obviously, over in Europe. They've covered Sasha a ton throughout his career. I remember reading a lot of their content covering Sasha before he came over to Sacramento. So while I can't confirm the report and while I can't necessarily support Eurohoops as a publication, they seem commendable. They seem like they understand, they seem plugged in, and they have a history of following and reporting on Sasha Vezenkov and his career. So I believe there is validity to this report. And again, while I'm not going to go as far as confirm it here, I'll just share my perspective. And my perspective is that when I read this report, I was not surprised by it. I also wasn't really bothered by it. And I don't mean that in any kind of disrespectful way towards Sasha Vezenkov, but I mean, I think the overall feeling with Sasha in Sacramento was that it hasn't worked. And I don't know if I was ready to go as far as saying it could never work and that the ship has sailed and that time was done, but from the conversations that I've had with people, my own observations of Sasha, some of his comments at the end of the season talking about how difficult it was for him and the rest of the roster outside of the core 7 or 8 guys to break in, not knowing and when they'd play. Sometimes they'd get opportunity, other times they wouldn't. Like just reacting to all of that, as well as just seeing his frustrations with my own eyes. Again, I was not surprised by this report. I know for a fact that Sasha was not happy with his role here in Sacramento, was not happy about how his first season in the NBA. Remember, his first season coming from being a EuroLeague MVP and competing for a EuroLeague title, which his team lost in the EuroLeague championship. That was a goal of his to win that. He chose to walk away and step away from that at the top of his game over there, again, as the guy in the EuroLeague, to come to the NBA, to join the Sacramento Kings, who had his rights. Now, a big portion of that, too, was his payday. He got paid as a role player here in Sacramento a few $1 million more than he was making over in Europe. So the money certainly had something to do with it. But you go from the top of your game, right? You go from being the guy, doesn't matter where you are, to coming to Sacramento, where the Kings have courted him, right? The Kings actively pursued him, wanted him. Many coaches, including Mike Brown, members of the front office, going to Europe to watch him play, to have conversations with him before officially bringing him over, right? You go through that entire process. This team expresses how much they are interested in you, how much they want you. They bring you over as one of the marquee moves they made in an offseason that was mainly about running things back after the first successful year in Sacramento in almost 2 decades. And then pretty quickly, it was apparent that, hey, his role in Sacramento was not going to be what we were hoping it would be, maybe what he was hoping it would be, and who he was as a player and the direction that the Sacramento Kings were going there was a disconnect there. So again, I don't think this is a spontaneous decision at all by Sasha. Like he went home to Europe over the offseason and went, you know what, I'm homesick. I love it here. I don't want to go back. Maybe that had something to do with it. I have no idea. But my speculation on this is not that he suddenly just made this decision out of the blue. I think this has been brewing for a while. Here's the thing. I understand both sides, right? This is not a pick a side thing. Now, if I naturally fall to any side, it's the Sacramento Kings side because I cover the Kings. The Kings are here, and I've been following the Kings a lot longer than I've been following Sasha Vezenkov. Got 1 season of Sasha in Sacramento, plus I paid attention a little bit during the courting phase and courting saga of trying to get Sasha to come to the NBA. So if I lean in on any side, it's the Kings side. But I don't think this is a situation worth picking a side because both sides are understandable. From Sasha's perspective, like I said, you go from the EuroLeague MVP, competing for a championship, to coming to Sacramento, disappointing season. You're not cracking the rotation. You're not getting I don't think I'll go as far as to say that the Kings did not give Sasha what he was promised, but he certainly, how he envisioned his NBA career going, how he envisioned his role would be on the team that he chose to join and left his life in Europe, I imagine was a lot different than being in and out of the rotation, barely cracking the rotation, and for his team to struggle to find a way to effectively use him. So I understand how difficult this past season must have been for Sasha. I also feel like personally, the defensive inefficiencies that Sasha Vezenkov has, they're there, but I think they were at times here in Sacramento, whether it was by Mike Brown or just in general, I think at times they were overemphasized. Because, look, I saw the struggle with his horizontal and lateral quickness, right? Didn't necessarily move his feet fast enough to guard players on the perimeter at the NBA level, right? The speed of the NBA better than anywhere else in the world. And that's not turning a nose up at EuroLeague basketball because they are incredibly talented over there. And look at the amount of European players that are dominating in the NBA right now, right? The best players in the NBA currently are EuroLeague players, European-based players. So that being said, the NBA is a completely different league. And Sasha did struggle defensively with adapting to the speed of the NBA game. But when I watched him play, when he did get his opportunities here in Sacramento, we saw the offensive firepower, we saw the offensive opportunity, the quick trigger, the willingness to take threes and hit threes, even attacking the basket, trying to finish around the rim. Like you saw the offensive promise that you know he had. Maybe not in as much of a volume as we were hoping for, but volume also comes with playing time, and his playing time was inconsistent because his defense was inconsistent, but his defense, I felt, was hyper-focused on. Because when I watched, I didn't see Sasha make astonishingly bad defensive errors, right? He did not do things that just made me went, oh my God, this guy is unplayable on the defensive end. Did he meet Mike Brown's standards? Clearly not. Like that's abundantly clear. He did not meet Mike Brown's standards of playing defense at the NBA level. But he's certainly not the only guy on this roster who has to say that, or who we can say that about. So I think Sasha deserved to play more at times. I think Sasha deserved to get more of an opportunity and have a longer leash, especially on the defensive end of the floor. That being said, from the Kings' perspective, I feel like Sasha was the player that fit what the Kings were doing their first year under Mike Brown, the first year of the playoffs, but they added him in a time where they were looking to transition to how they want to play now. Sasha, in many ways, is a representation of the past version of the Kings. Now, obviously, that version of the Kings won 2 more games and actually made the playoffs. So some of you might be going, hey, Matt, shouldn't the Kings want to get back to that past version because last year's version didn't necessarily work? I agree and disagree in some areas. The results obviously were not as good, and this is a results-based league. But the Kings made exponential growth and are, I think, building a foundation and building a way to play that ultimately can bring about longer-term success. But potential doesn't mean you know what if it's not realized. And I think where the Kings are clearly potentially trying to go, Sasha just does not fit that mold. And on top of that, unfortunately, Sasha battled with injuries. And especially at a time where Sasha had an opportunity to really break out, right? Trey Lyles started the season hurt, comes back, gets hurt again. Window is wide open for Sasha to get opportunity. He gets some playing time. He gets hurt, had that, I think it was an ankle injury that sat him out for a good portion of the remainder of the season. And then while the Kings started to figure things out on the defensive end and while they were trying to deal with those injuries, Sasha was not a part of that. So by the time he was available to come back, he was behind the 8-ball defensively, which at that point had kind of become the calling card or identity of the Sacramento Kings and how they were going to play for the remainder of the season. As the Kings adapted to a more physical style of play, Sasha did not fit that mold. So had Sasha not gotten hurt, maybe things would have looked differently and this conversation would look a lot different. The Kings would feel a lot better about his role going forward. But those injuries certainly kind of bolstered the Kings' argument of, hey, man, like, we're trying to win. We brought you over. We can't wait for you. This was going to be if you're upset about the opportunity that you got or did not get, that was your opportunity and you got hurt. It's not our fault. And we have to move on and we have to play guys. And unfortunately, guys stepped up while you were out. Here's the harshest reality of the situation, right? I'm putting this bluntly. It might be unfair, but it is reality. Sasha Vezenkov's money, the amount of money he is being paid, which is $6.6 million next season, followed by a $6.9 million option for the 2025-2026 season. But guaranteed $6.6 million next year. That money matters a lot more than Sasha himself. And that's how this situation is going to... That's I think the most important thing to focus on in this situation. Because Sasha can say, I don't want to go back. I'm not returning. But the Kings are the ones that have the control. They have contractual control of Sasha Vezenkov. So essentially they have 3 options. They can, one, and this is, I'm sure there's things in place to where the Kings can't force anything, but essentially they can tell Sasha to honor his contract. Like, if you want to continue playing in the NBA, this is your contract. You have to honor it. Come back to Sacramento, report to training camp, and try and earn a better spot if that's what you're looking for. 2, the Kings could waive him and be forced to eat his $6.6 million salary, which I can't really imagine them wanting to do so. That's the Kings doing Sasha a favor at the cost of almost $7 million. I can't see Sacramento doing that, but it is an option available to them. The final option is trading him. Now, I guess there is also a 4th option too, but this one's a little more convoluted, that Sasha could retire from the NBA and then try and go back and play in Europe, but I think there would be struggles with that, with FIBA and their things. That goes down a road that I don't know enough about. But the 3 Kings options are essentially, to me, like, have him report and honor his contract. You can waive him and eat that money, or you trade him. And if we're going down the trade conversation, the Kings could replace Trey Lyles with Sasha Vezenkov in the Washington Wizards deal that we were discussing. Now, again, I bring up that trade package specifically because that's what we've talked about a lot here on Locked On Kings, and that's something that makes a lot of sense. I'm not reporting in any way or suggesting in any way that this deal that I've laid out there and that we've discussed, expiring contracts in 13 to the Washington Wizards for Kyle Kuzma, is an actual deal on the table that both sides are discussing. I think it makes a lot of sense for both sides, but since that's a hypothetical conversation we've had, and a lot of you responded to that conversation or that trade with, can the Kings find a way to do it without including Trey Lyles? Well, yes. They could replace Trey Lyles with Sasha Vezenkov and his $6.6 million guaranteed. It still can be an expiring deal because with the team option or with the option at the end, they can waive that option and it's just a 1 year. I'm pretty sure it's a team option and not a player option. Probably should have double checked that before looking. Let me double check that right now. I'm going to stall for time here while I'm looking that up on my phone. Which is always great on a podcast. But if it is a team option, then essentially it's a expiring deal next year, and the Wizards could still get off his money, move on from him, and open up all that cap space next season. All right, let's see here. Checking right now if my phone would load. It's a team option in 2025-26. So if the Kings were to trade Sasha to Washington at the end of next season, once his guaranteed money is off the books, they can waive him, move on, and it does the same thing essentially as Trey. And they might even prefer that because next season they would pay Sasha $2 million less than they would have to pay Trey. Although I think we all believe that Trey could be more of an impactful player for Washington than Sasha would be immediately if that's what they care about. So you add Sasha to the deal with Davion Mitchell and Chris Duarte, 2 expiring contracts, attach 13 to that, and get Kyle Kuzma. That deal could still work. So there are options out there if the Kings would look to trade Sasha. But in just a little bit, we'll talk about what Sasha's opportunity looks like in Sacramento if he were to return, if the Kings were to have him honor his contract and play next season here in Sacramento. We'll discuss that. Plus, we still will talk about how this looks for Monte McNair and what this looks like for Monte and the Kings front office, who brought him over as a major piece of their offseason last year. It's all coming right here on Locked On Kings. Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time, which is making it as easy as possible to get your NBA Finals tickets. Now, maybe you Kings fans aren't too interested in watching the Dallas Mavericks versus Boston Celtics, but hey, if you have the opportunity to go, I can imagine attending an NBA Finals game is an incredible once-in-a-lifetime experience. But regardless if you're trying to go to a major event like that or maybe even a local show at your theater or comedy club or anything like that, Game Time is what you should be using from now on to buy your tickets. They have incredible last-minute deals where you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater shows, etc. You can get these flash deals where you can save even more with in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. In fact, the closer it actually gets to the start of the event, the more money you'll save, the cheaper the tickets are. It actually rewards you for making those last-minute decisions. They have all-in pricing, so you know exactly what you're paying for up front, no hidden fees or anything like that, plus the most accurate seat views that you will find, which is especially great for major stadium events, like if you're going to see a stadium concert or an NFL game, you'll know exactly what your view is going to be like from your seat. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets or any tickets, period, with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Again, enter the code LOCKEDONNBA. You get $20 off the tickets to the first event that you choose. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. As of right now, the most likely result or scenario involving Sasha Vezenkov, even after this report, is that he's a Sacramento King next season. He's under contract to be. The expectation as of now, unless things change, the expectation as of now should be that Sasha will report to training camp and do his job. I don't know Sasha personally. Again, I've only really covered him for 1 year, and even then, I've not had too many interactions or conversations with the guy. From what I understand, he's an absolute professional. I believe that he would honor his contract if that's what it came down to. But if he were to return to Sacramento, let's talk about realistically, and this is probably also playing into why this report is coming out and why he has hesitations to return to Sacramento, what his opportunity would really look like here in Sacramento next year. I think Sasha would get a fair shot at earning a consistent rotational spot. He's good enough to get a shot, but assuming the Kings do what they are supposed to be doing this offseason, or what they need to do this offseason, which is adding overall wing depth, earning a spot comes from likely a combination of noticeable defensive improvement to where Mike Brown has the confidence that Sasha can play the team defense and the physical style of play that the Kings want to replicate from the end of last season throughout this entire year and make their identity going forward. And Sasha being the lights out, flamethrower, undeniable bench scorer that teams have to respect or fear enough to where if you rotate him in there with any Fox or Sabonis lineup, you either risk giving him open opportunities and open looks, or you can't leave him, and that gives the other Kings featured offensive players a little more room to work. To me, it's pretty simple. As long as Trey Lyles is here, I don't see Sasha having any kind of regular role. Unfortunately, it is a one versus the other type scenario. I don't see a situation where Mike finds a way to balance them in the rotation consistently the same way he found a way to balance the Keon Ellis, Davion Mitchell guard lineups instead of one over the other. Because that's what it was at the start of last season, and he figured it out towards the end of the year, and it worked great, at least during that time. And I have to imagine, assuming Davion Mitchell is on the Sacramento Kings to start next year, that they'll continue to run with that. I don't see a way that the Kings can find an effective use of Trey and Sasha at the same time. And if they have to pick one or the other, it's going to be Trey easily. Now, if the scenario we've discussed at length here on Locked On Kings plays out to where Sasha comes back and the Kings trade Trey Lyles as part of a package to get Kyle Kuzma, Kyle obviously steps into that starting 4 role with Keegan probably moving to the 3 or some combination of the two of them at the 3 and 4. Then Sasha maybe has a window to crack into a consistent rotation spot off of the bench. Then again, in addition to a Kyle Kuzma trade, I think the Kings still need to be doing their best to add more wing depth and wing talent that more fits the style of play better than how we think Sasha does and will going forward. The realistic best case scenario that I've come up with for Sasha here in Sacramento, like if things are going right, the best case scenario for Sasha that I see realistically is like a 12 to 15 minutes a night role where he is a volume bench shooter who can hang and fit in Sacramento's physical defensive system. I really, truly do not feel that that's that far out of the realm of possibility. Some best case scenarios are, man, a lot has to go right. What I just said there, that role for Sasha does not seem absurd for me to ask for or for the Kings to be looking for Sasha to expect. But he hasn't earned that yet. And reporting to training camp is the only way that he can earn that. If he is looking for more, though, truly, if Sasha is truly looking for more than what I just said there, it ain't happening here. So the question is, if the Kings go the trade route, is his NBA career done if it doesn't work here? I don't think so. Sasha being the valuable volume 3-point scorer that he is, an offensive option that he is, even with the defensive question marks, that's valuable in the league. Sasha does have a lot to add to this league, and I do personally believe that Sasha Vezenkov is an NBA caliber talent. I think his ceiling is significantly lower than many of us were hoping for. There are people talking about Sasha as being a starter for Sacramento eventually. I don't think he's an NBA caliber starter. If he is, you're probably not a very good basketball team. If he's starting for your team, you're probably not very good. His best case scenario is kind of what I laid out there. If you're looking for a little bit more than that, maybe he can be a 15 to maximum 20 minutes a night guy who just chucks up threes off the bench, and maybe you can squeeze him into a closing lineup if you need to. But I don't see him finding that. I do see, though, teams having interest in him. I mean, just looking at the teams who are at the bottom of the league in three-point shooting, right? San Antonio. A lot of European history with San Antonio and with Greg Popovich. Toronto, Detroit, Washington, Orlando. All teams that I think could use a player like Sasha off of their bench to help bolster their three-point shooting and give them more of an offensive punch with that second unit. So I don't think that the Kings would have a tremendous amount of trouble trying to find a team to take Sasha and his $6 million. I do think, though, we have to be realistic with what you would expect in return. If you're moving Sasha, you're either doing it as part of a package deal where you're adding Sasha to some kind of deal to go and get a big player, and he's kind of a throw-in to either make the money work or to kind of add icing to the cake and give a team a player that theoretically could help them in the short term, and if it doesn't work out, you can just waive them at the end of the year, or going into next season, the following season. Or, like, if it's straight up value, what is the straight up value for Sasha Vezenkov? It's probably like a second round pick or that level talent. I can't imagine the Kings gaining much from a Sasha trade other than, like I said, including him in a bigger package or simply trying to get off of some of his salary. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks, the number one fantasy sports app in America with more than 5 million members. It's the most fun and exciting way to get in on all the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. With Prize Picks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a Prize Pick lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 players, stat projections, and you're locked in. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every single week, from lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays, which increases your chance of getting a win, to getting your entry fees back if you have losing lineups on Fridays. Prize Picks is America's number one fantasy sports app, and you can get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. And the finals mean more on Prize Picks, so you do the star players. You get boosted payouts on when those players are succeeding, when they have big moments, big games. There's so many fun and unique ways to play around NBA Finals time, so I encourage you to get in on the action right now. When you go to Prize Picks and sign up, make sure you use our promo code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, Locked On NBA. You put in $100, you get $100 instantly. You put in $50, you get $50 immediately. It's more money for you to make even more money and have more fun on Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So what does this latest news involving Sasha Vezenkov mean for and about Monte McNair? I've had a couple of you reach out to me on my social media platforms and email and personally say, Matt, this looks terrible for Monte McNair. Monte put his eggs in this basket last offseason as one of his big moves, and now the guy could be out of the league. It's a complete failure. It has not worked. Monte should be on the hot seat if he doesn't make noticeable improvements this summer. Now, I'm not going that far. And also, the Kings they put some eggs in the Sasha Vezenkov basket. Sure, they are paying $6 million, almost $7 million for him. But I don't think the Kings viewed Sasha as the savior as maybe so many members of the fan base did. I could be trying to step too far in front of the Kings. I know they were looking at him as being the primary addition that this team made to last year's group that they essentially ran back. But ultimately, again, this just falls right into the overall path of Sacramento last offseason just not working. Running it back, bringing in Sasha, bringing in Duarte, bringing in McGee as your main offseason additions, and trying to maintain your offensive firepower from the year before while making noticeable strides on the defensive end, which this team ultimately was able to do. It just didn't work, right? In many ways, the Kings kind of had to go the route that they did running it back. I agreed with it at the time. I still understand it now, but we have the context of it did not work. And Sasha kind of just falls into that. In so many ways, like Vezenkov, he's not the reason, but he is a representation of what we've talked about a lot this offseason. Just the overall disconnect with this roster and where the Kings are trying to go in the system that Mike Brown is trying to implement. Like, Sasha is a perfect example of that, and he's not alone. You could say Kevin Huerter is a guy as well that kind of fits this mold of the offensive opportunities there. By the way, Kevin Huerter, a much better player than Sasha Vezenkov is, just to make that perfectly clear. But these are guys that fit kind of how the Kings were initially, but don't necessarily fit where the Kings are trying to go. I've said it before. I've said it a million times already this summer, and I'll say it again. To me, this offseason is about getting your roster and your system on the same page. And if you're doing that, it likely does not include Sasha Vezenkov in any kind of significant role. He might still be on this roster, but I don't see it in any kind of significant role. I think he sees it the same way, hence the reason why this report is coming out and he has hesitations to return to Sacramento overall. If he does return to Sacramento, though, I do believe he can be impactful, and I think he has to stay ready because there are going to be times where the Kings call his number, whether it's because of injuries or whatever. They need some buckets off the bench. I believe he can help this team just like I believe he can help a lot of NBA teams. But our expectations have to be realistic. It's straightforward. This is who he is. This is what he can bring you. He is not a featured guy on a playoff roster, but he is a guy that can be on a playoff roster and can help a playoff roster when needed. But his opportunities might be few and far between and certainly will be inconsistent unless he shows tremendous amount of growth, which he's an older player. It's not like, even though he's a rookie technically last season, he's not a rookie by age, right? He's an older, established player. He kind of is what he is at this point. Here's the thing. Ultimately, going back to Monte McNair, Monty has to find guys this offseason that clearly edge Sasha Vezenkov, Chris Duarte, Kessler Edwards. The Kings need to find guys that basically edge those guys out, whether it's replacing them on the roster altogether or adding them to the roster, and that pushes guys that are fringe rotational pieces to, yeah, you're probably not having much of a chance at cracking the rotation. And again, I'm not saying that all three of those guys don't have any value that they can add to the Sacramento Kings. I'm just saying if the Kings truly want to be the team that competes in the Western Conference, and if they truly want to address their shortcomings from last season, Monty needs to add players to this roster that are more established NBA rotational talented players that can play the way that they want to play, to where it makes the decision easy. It makes it understandable why Sasha and Duarte aren't playing. That's what Monty's job is. We'll see how this saga plays out. I have no ill will towards Sasha whatsoever. If he returns to Sacramento, fantastic. We'll cheer for him. If he doesn't, in whatever capacity, a trade, a buyout, whatever it is, I don't think there should be any ill will at all towards Sasha and it not working out here. It just didn't work. And that's kind of the reality of the situation. Again, it's harsh, but it's true. Sasha's money matters a lot more to the Kings than Sasha himself. He thankfully does not make so much money to where the Kings are in a really, really tough kind of growth spot. $6.6 million in the grand scheme of things is not that big of a deal, but it's also not nothing when you don't have a lot of cap space to begin with and you're trying to improve your roster. As it's been all season, ball's in your court, Monty. Just add it to the list of things you have to figure out. We'll, of course, ride the roller coaster with the Kings all offseason long, whatever decisions they make about Sasha, about Malik Monk, about all these guys going forward for the remainder of this offseason. Make sure you keep it dialed in here to the Locked On Kings podcast. We'll get you through this offseason, get you ready for training camp. We got the draft coming up. We got free agency after that, California Classic, Summer League action. So much still to come this summer, and we'll have it all right here for you on Locked On Kings. So I appreciate your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.